The Indianapolis Colts wide receiver room returns many of the same faces from last year, but can they hit higher levels of production in 2025? Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Hicks, your resident film nerd of horseshoehuddle.com. And today we are continuing our positional preview series of the 2025 Indianapolis Colts. We've hit a couple positions on offense and defense, and we are keeping that train rolling today. Today, we're going to be diving into the Colts wide receiver room, a room that doesn't really have any changes coming their way, or at least we're assuming isn't going to have any changes coming their way. But there's still a lot to talk about when it comes to player roles, projections, what some young players could do in this room, and ultimately where this room can go with the Colts quarterback situation in 2025 and beyond. So we're going to talk about the three presumed starters, some intriguing depth pieces, and then a few dark horses that I don't think they're going to make the roster, but they certainly could factor into the practice squad and potentially to the future of this team down the line. So kicking it off with the three starters, unlike last offseason, there's not really much of a question when it comes to the starters this year. I think that we have kind of closed the book on Alec Pierce being pushed by A.D. Mitchell for a true starting job. A.D. Mitchell will certainly have a role on this offense and a role with this team, but Alec Pierce just had such a fantastic 2024 season that you really can't justify benching him unless he just has a dreadful training camp, which is very unlikely to happen at this point. So we are looking at Michael Pittman Jr. on the outside, the Colts' highest paid wide receiver. On the other outside wide receiver spot, we got Alec Pierce, and then in the slot, Josh Downs. Those will be the Colts' three starting receivers this year. They have been for the last couple seasons now for the team. When we're looking at what these three players bring, they basically are perfect complements for each other. I wouldn't say any of these three players are complete bona fide star receivers, but what they each bring complements what the other guy does. I mean, obviously, when you look at Alec Pierce, one of the best deep threats in football last year. I think he had like 7 catches of 40-plus yards on the year. Could have been more with some better throws from his quarterbacks. Had some fantastic moments like the end of that first Jacksonville Jaguars game where he had over 100 yards receiving in the fourth quarter alone to bring the Colts back in that game. Had the game-winning touchdown catch against the New England Patriots, or that set up the game-winning 2-point conversion on the next play. So he just had some great moments last year and really emerged as the Colts' best downfield option, and he led the team in receiving yards in 16 games for the first time in his career. So Alec Pierce had a breakout campaign in 2024 as that legit deep threat. Then you go to Josh Downs, who led the Colts in receptions and receptions per game. He had over 5 catches per game with 57 yards receiving per game, which also led the team in receiving yards per game. He only played 14 games due to multiple injuries suffered last year. Highly productive player, fantastic slot guy, kind of their pace setter of the offense, a player where on 1st and 10, he can get them into 2nd and 3, 2nd and 4. On 3rd and 5, he can get that first down for them. Just the best separator on the team. The Colts know how to isolate him in prime matchups, and he's just an outstanding young player. I mean, honestly, he's probably the guy you invest in the most in this wide receiver room going forward, just because of that youth and that production that he's had the last couple years. So Josh Downs, just an ascending young player. Really fantastic football player for the team. And then Michael Pittman Jr., the highest paid player in the room, had a down year last year. He was suffering with a back injury all year long, a back injury that Adam Schefter, I think, was saying within the first month of the season that the Colts were likely to place him on IR. Pittman decided to fight through it. He played 16 of 17 games last year, and he had a down year respective to what he's done in his career. He didn't hit 1,000 yards. He didn't hit his 100 catches like he has in the past, but was still a pretty productive outside wide receiver for the team. And he really dominated in that short to intermediate range that he always has in his career. So hopefully getting back to being healthy this season can bring this Colts team back their number one wide receiver, who, again, dominates in that intermediate, like over the middle of the field type of system that the Colts are looking for. And again, these guys just are really great pieces for each other. Downs, you get the short pace setter who can separate and win against those matchups. Michael Pittman Jr., your dog on the outside, who wins over the middle of the field, takes the big hits, and can create after the catch. And then Alec Pierce, he might be a one-trick pony, but the one trick is so good that you really can't slight him. This is the guy who wins so effortlessly down the field that every offensive coordinator in football would love to have a weapon like this on that side of the field. It's actually really interesting when you look at the numbers of these three receivers last year. They were very, very close in terms of just what they did on a per-game basis. Michael Pittman Jr. in his 16 games averaged a little over 4 catches per game for just over 50 yards receiving per game. Alec Pierce in his 16 games played just over 2 catches per game, but 51.5 receiving yards per game on just 2 catches is kind of insane. And then Josh Downs, a little over 5 catches per game with 57 receiving yards per game. So the Colts kind of had this three-headed monster on offense. And ideally, you would like Michael Pittman Jr. to be leading that room in terms of catches and yards because of what the Colts are paying him. But again, when you have three guys who work so well together, it can be entirely game plan based. I mean, if you're playing against a more aggressive defense that wants to bring some pressure and is willing to leave guys on an island on the outside, you can take more shots to an Alec Pierce, and maybe he could lead that game in receiving yards. Or heck, if it's even a game where you're just trailing in the fourth quarter, Alec Pierce is going to get force-fed the ball, and he's going to make some plays down the field. If you're playing against a team that is going to more sit back and take away the long ball and leave the short stuff open and leave, mass mismatches that you can really take advantage of, then you can have a Josh Downs game. And then Michael Pittman Jr. is kind of just that steady force whenever he's healthy, a guy that can just make defenses pay over the middle of the field and create after the catch. So I think this wide receiver room works really well. They don't have a superstar in the room, but you kind of get the star player in the aggregate where you get a complete receiver with all these three guys being together. So you don't have a Jamar Chase, but you get aspects of a Jamar Chase in each player in terms of Alec Pierce being this superb elite deep threat and Josh Downs being one of the best separators in football and Michael Pittman Jr. just being this gritty, hard-nosed, over the middle wide receiver. I really like how this wide receiver room works together. A really underrated aspect too is how good of blockers Pittman and Pierce have become in their NFL careers, big body players that do the dirty work, and I think that they're just fantastic at that as well. So, yeah, I'm not going to put this Colts wide receiver room like these starters. I wouldn't put them in the top 10 in the NFL because at the end of the day, when you have a 3rd and 12, you want to have that guy that you can just go to make a play. And I would certainly take a Justin Jefferson, a Jamar Chase, and A.J. Brown over having them in the aggregate like the Colts have. But there is utility in having these guys. It does complement a team that, when you have a Jonathan Taylor in the backfield, you can complement that really well with just good complementary wide receivers that can do their roles at a high level. So as long as the quarterback play doesn't hold them back, I think this wide receiver room is effective enough to win football games. I think these three guys are great in their role. And again, as long as the quarterback can deliver the football, which has been a big if the last couple of years with these wide receivers, I think these guys can be like they were last year, 3 guys who can get over 800 yards each, and maybe 1 or 2 of them can hit 1,000 yards on the season, depending on what's really going on throughout the year. So I really have high hopes for these 3 guys. Hopefully they can keep all of them together past this season. Hopefully the quarterback play is good enough to where you can justify keeping all 3 of these guys going forward. But I have really loved how all 3 of these guys are like a puzzle piece that fit each other perfectly to make a beautiful picture. They just all work so well together, having the short to intermediate to the deep guy all be really good at their individual roles. Yes, the defense kind of knows what's coming with each of them, but you still have to stop it. It's one thing to say, oh, we're going to take away Alec Pierce on the deep ball, but you actually have to do it too. And that's what teams struggled with last year. It's one thing to say, we're going to take away Josh Downs on the short game, but you actually have to cover him in that too. And it's hard to do that. That's why they're the best at what they do in the NFL. So at the end of the day, again, this is not some superstar like driven wide receiver room that you would take among the top 10 in the league, but I really love how these guys fit together, and I've enjoyed watching the last couple of years. And hopefully, whether it's Danny Dimes or Anthony Richardson, the quarterback can get them the ball this next season, and we can see these guys hit career highs in receiving yards like we saw Alec Pierce do last year. But coming up We're going to talk about the key depth players in this Colts wide receiver room. And while, maybe at the top three, we don't have a guy with superstar potential, there might be one on the team that does have that potential. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. But first, you ever wish managing your money felt easier with Monarch Money? It can be. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building up that wealth. A lot of you are probably in a similar boat as me. I'm married, and I just have a lot of expenses, obviously, with being married and having my own house and everything like that. And we have the struggles too, where we work multiple jobs. So we are doing so much with fast food and just not cooking the right way we should. And it just drains your account. So having all of those accounts and other purchases and everything all together in one app, and that also tracks your investments, super valuable and helps everything seem real and tangible. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. Welcome back, Locked On Colts Everydayers. We are here talking about the Colts wide receiver room. You just heard me gushing about the starters and how they all perfectly fit together. But now let's talk about the key role players, the presumed three other players that we think are going to make this roster in 2025, and that is A.D. Mitchell, Ashton Dulin, and Anthony Gould. Gould and Dulin are likely to be special teams guys this next season. I mean, Dulin has been here for forever at this point. He's one of the longest tenured Colts players on this team. He's been a core four guy for a long time. Fantastic gunner on the outside. And when he gets his opportunities on offense, he's produced over the last couple of years. So probably one of the best fifth or sixth wide receivers in football. And just in terms of what he brings to an NFL team, it's immaculate to have a player like that on your roster. And then Anthony Gould is still a young player the Colts are hoping to develop. They have him being their return man. Hopefully he can hold down that punt return and kick return duties all season long and be that guy that they drafted him to be, and maybe get a chance out there to get some slot snaps behind Josh Downs and make some plays on offense. So Gould, they're still taking the long-term approach with him. I think he's like 24 years old, 25 years old. I think he'll be fine in the long term with the Colts. And then A.D. Mitchell is the big guy we're talking about here with this second wave. He was a player where last offseason had a really good training camp early on, really before the pads came on. He was really pushing a player like Alec Pierce, and many people speculated that he could potentially take over as a starter on the outside alongside Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs. Now, Alec Pierce kind of put that to rest with a really strong training camp and then a really strong start to the season. But A.D. Mitchell is a guy who just has so much potential. It's hard to really give up on him. And he's kind of in the same realm of a player as an Anthony Richardson, where there's such a young player there that has mastered the really hard aspects of his position. It's really about, can he get the nitty-gritty down? Can he get the fundamentals down and become that player that he's destined to be? I mean, when you look at him, he's got the size, he's got the speed, he's got the route running, he's got the separation ability, and then honestly, he's really good off the line of scrimmage as well, as long as he's able to avoid that contact early on. That's a really difficult thing to have. I mean, you look at who the Colts starters are right now. Aside from Josh Downs, I don't think, Pierce or Pittman Jr. are nearly as good separators as A.D. Mitchell is. But what A.D. Mitchell is lacking right now is just the ability to catch the ball consistently, the ability to win contested catches, the ability to create after the catch, and the ability to find space against zone coverage. Those are fundamental things that wide receivers have to do to be successful in the NFL. And that's really where he is trailing players like Pittman and Pierce. I mean, Pierce especially, because that's the guy he really was competing with last year. Pierce just does those things at such a higher level than Mitchell showed last year as a rookie. So as a result, he's probably going to be wide receiver 4. There will be a role for him this year. I think he'll still get anywhere between 20 to 40% of the offensive snaps. It really comes down to what injuries look like in front of him. If there's injuries like last year, he'll probably get closer to that 30 or 40% snap mark. If there are no injuries, it'll probably be closer to like 20% this next season. And you really want to just see that growth from him in those snaps. He doesn't need to come out and look like, again, a Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson. He doesn't need to look like a superstar in year 2 when he's only 22 years old. But you would like to see him take a positive step forward. Last year, he was 0 for 5 on contested catch situations. I think he was the worst receiver on the team in creating after the catch. And he also had the highest drop rate on the team as well. If you can just see those numbers even out a little bit, let's see a couple more contested catches. Let's see him creating a little bit more after the catch over expected. I think that's really what it was. It was yards created after catch over expected. He was the worst on the team. Let's see him actually force some missed tackles after the catch, hold on to the football. He had a fumble against the Bills. Really was really careless with the ball. And then overall just catch the football when it's thrown his way. Had a couple big drops last season. One on third down against the Green Bay Packers early in the year that was very notable. So let's just see him improve in those areas, and then we can start talking about him being the future of this wide receiver room. Because, when I talked about the top of the show with these starters, these guys are just fantastic role players, in my opinion. Maybe Michael Pittman Jr. is like a higher end role player, like a low end legit wide receiver 1. But they are very good role players. Pierce is your downfield guy. Downs is your slot guy. And Pittman is your gritty over the middle wide receiver. But they don't have that guy who, again, on 3rd and 12, you need a first down. Regardless of who's covering them, you're going to go to that guy. I think A.D. Mitchell has the potential to be that player. Now, there's a big difference between the potential and actually being that player. He actually has to hit that potential. But unlike those other 3 guys the Colts have, A.D. Mitchell has that potential to be a legit number 1 wide receiver in football. He just has a long way to go. He has a lot to do in terms of fundamentals and just playing, again, like a dog on the football field there, learning from Michael Pittman Jr., where Pittman is getting back up after getting leveled in the middle of the field, and A.D. Mitchell is shying away from contact. There is a big difference there, and that's what separates those players, because it's not athleticism that separates them. It might separate more the other way with A.D. Mitchell, but you want to see Mitchell play a little bit more like a Pittman, or even like a Downs or a Pierce even. You want to see just that doggedness that those guys have. And Mitchell just doesn't have that right now. But I think if he does develop that mentality to go along with his natural skill set, I think he can be a really, really good wide receiver in the NFL. So it's hard for me to be out on A.D. Mitchell. I know he is probably the most divisive player on the roster aside from Anthony Richardson. I've seen Colts fans calling him, the next Marvin Harrison. I've seen others calling him this unrosterable player that the Colts need to cut. I know the fantasy football community is extremely high on him, and I know actual football guys are a little bit lower on him after what he just did in his rookie season. So it's kind of tough. It's tough to really digest like what this guy can be. But for me personally, I kind of fall a little bit in the middle where, yes, there are a lot of things he needs to improve upon going into next season, but I can't quit him yet. I just can't. He's so young. He's so talented. There's a lot of good there. He just needs to take that step forward. I don't need this to be a giant leap forward for him. Just show me some tiny baby steps in the right direction. That's kind of where I was with Richardson going into last year, and Richardson in a lot of ways took a step back. As long as Mitchell can avoid the step back and take that step forward, I can feel very optimistic about him going forward, and maybe good enough to where he could be the replacement for an Alec Pierce going into 2026 when Pierce is hitting the open market and the Colts might not be willing to pay him what a team like the Chiefs or the Bills would be willing to pay him, where they're kind of one piece away and he could be that piece. So yeah, I think it's a big year for Mitchell, but it's not like last year where there's going to be as much thrown on him. I think he just has to go out there, be effective in his snaps, and show that he's willing to grow in terms of that contested catch ability, that ability to make the easy catches as well, finding space against zone, being a little bit more of a dog after the catch. I think he can be that this year. So I'm very optimistic about him. It's all about just taking that step forward for A.D. Mitchell. So that's essentially what the Colts roster receivers are going to look like this year. I'd be shocked if it's not these 6 guys. Maybe an Anthony Gould could be in jeopardy a little bit in training camp, but for the most part, these 6 players will be the Colts receivers on the roster from day one, and as long as nobody gets hurt, probably in week 17 as well. But what about after these 6 guys? Are there any players on the team that factor into the practice squad or factor into, maybe we stash them a little bit and then they could be guys that make the roster going forward. We're going to talk about the bottom of the roster dark horses here in just a second. But first, you guys have probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them, but you're looking for something beyond the usual pill. It's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast. On average, in 15 minutes, effects can last up to 36 hours, so stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options haven't worked, Rugiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. You can even read real customer reviews on their site. It's helping a lot of people feel more confident and present in the moment. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit Rugiet website for full safety information. All right, Locked On Colts every day as we're back talking about the bottom of this Colts wide receiver room. And yes, again, I don't expect any of these players to make the roster, but we could certainly see some of these guys factor into the long term of the Indianapolis Colts. There's certainly a direction where, these guys could be practice squad stashes for a good chunk of this season or for the entirety of this season, come back in next training camp when there is a little bit more room to make the team and establish themselves as special teams players or bottom of the roster guys that can contribute. The two guys who are most likely to stick around with this team because they've been with the team for a couple years now, and they have kind of dominated the third and fourth team reps in the past, are Laquan Treadwell and DJ Montgomery. They've both gotten some run with the Colts in the past, particularly DJ Montgomery. He actually has some regular season production. I believe he had like a 2-catch, like 60-yard game against the Pittsburgh Steelers a couple years ago. Might not have been 2 for 60, like 2 for 50, and a touchdown against the Pittsburgh Steelers a couple years ago. It was that game where Michael Pittman Jr. got knocked out with concussion pretty early. Montgomery had to step in and serve a role, and he was quite effective in that role. I think he's kind of the guy they've been grooming to be a potential next Ashton Dulin. They've been working with him for a couple years now. And the team clearly really likes him. Great size, great speed, really gritty player that's willing to do the dirty work. DJ Montgomery is someone this Colts coaching staff very, very much likes. And then Laquan Treadwell, it's actually kind of hilarious that this former first-round pick bust has been on this Colts team for a couple years now. He dominates in the preseason. It kind of shows just the disparity between, yes, this guy is a first-round pick bust, but he's still so much better than most wide receiver eights around the NFL. So Laquan Treadwell is a guy who I'm sure will finish the preseason with 150 yards in the 3 games, make it onto the Colts practice squad, and be one of their call-ups if any injury were to happen throughout the season. So Laquan Treadwell certainly going to earn himself a chance this offseason to stick around. Treadwell and Montgomery, those are really the two guys we're looking at here with this third wave of wide receivers in terms of the Colts clearly like these guys. But when we're looking at these other players, Coleman Owen, Ajo, I think is how you say his name. Sorry, Ajo, Tyler Common, Blaine Taylor, and Landon Parker. They're all really kind of just shots in the dark to see if any of these athletes can really stick. But that's kind of what Ashton Dulin was a couple years ago as well. Ashton Dulin back in his draft year was kind of just a big athlete out of small school Malone. He was productive at Malone, but again, you're not really looking at a lower school production. You're looking at the physical traits, and Dulin was able to come in here and press enough to make the team, and he's been here ever since. So when you're looking at players like Blaine Taylor and Landon Parker and Ajo, those are just 3 fantastic athletes that really lit the world on fire in the pre-draft process. I know Ajo came from the CFL, but Blaine Taylor and Landon Parker, fantastic athletes who were among the top of their position group in the pre-draft cycle. So if they can just come out here and do what Dulin did, you always have a chance to make it in the NFL. And those are really the guys I'm looking at here. I mean, Common, I'm sure will come out and have a pretty good camp as well. But For the most part, Blaine Taylor, Landon Parker, those are the two most intriguing names just in terms of the athletic ability and what they could potentially bring to the team as like a gunner or just, a big-bodied, fun player to watch. I mean, we think back to like the Mike Straughns of the past where, just the fantastic athletes, big-body guys having a great preseason, winning the fans' hearts. He didn't really turn into anything with the Colts, but that's kind of what you have to do to at least stick in some way to the NFL. So Landon Parker and Blaine Taylor are two guys that we're really going to be looking at throughout the offseason. But really, when it comes to this third wave, it's DJ Montgomery, Laquan Treadwell. Those are the top two guys that the Colts value, the top two guys that will likely be on the practice squad and probably the next two guys up if any injury were to happen. And then you have Taylor and Parker and Ajojo really competing for that third practice squad spot if the Colts want to keep three wide receivers on the practice squad, which I believe they did for a little bit of time last year as well. So, I think Parker, Taylor, or Ajojo could be that next gunner type guy, but that's really what we're talking about here with the bottom of the roster at wide receiver. It's kind of all pretty basic. I don't want to say basic with wide receiver, but it's kind of all what we expect with this wide receiver room, but there is still a lot of expectations and a lot of just kind of waiting and seeing with this overall group of wide receivers. You have your top three guys, then you have whatever A.D. Mitchell can be, the ultimate wild card in terms of a star or a complete bust at this level. And then you have some other players in Gould and Doolin who are dominant on special teams, Montgomery and Treadwell, the Colts obviously and then Taylor and Parker, who are fantastic athletes who maybe they can develop into something in the NFL. So that is the Colts wide receiver room. I'm expecting pretty moderate production from this year as long as the Colts quarterback room can get them the football. I think this Colts receiver room is pretty solid and they might not be top 10 in the NFL, but like top 15, top 16, I think they can certainly make that argument with the type of players that they have. But you guys let me know in the comment section below who your favorite player is in the Colts wide receiver room and what your expectations are for the Colts receivers in this upcoming season. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Colts your first listen today and every day. Now, for your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Scouting as training camp gets closer and moves are being made. Host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will give you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. You guys want to become a Locked On Colts insider and chat with us directly and get that insider scoop. Follow the link in our show notes. And if you don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks2 on socials. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We love your guys' ratings, reviews, and we'll see you guys back here next week.